and is known as the Stockbridge-Muncie community. We pay honor and respect to their ancestors, past and present, as we commit to building a more inclusive and equitable space for all. And again, given the remote nature of this event, we invite you to reflect on the colonial legacies and the Indigenous people of the land, wherever you currently are. So today we'll hear some introductions from the other folks you see on this screen. And then we'll hear from our guest, Adrienne Maree Brown, which I'm very excited for. And then what will come after is a conversation with the Williams College students who will also introduce themselves shortly. As an attendee, you're able to use the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen to type any questions you have throughout the session. And Asil and I will help to bring those questions forward towards the end of our time. There's also an opportunity towards the end for attendees to raise their hands and ask live questions. And so we'll let you know when that time is started. And to let you know, we will be recording this session. So if you'd prefer not to be part of the recording, then please don't participate in the verbal Q&A. However, you can still participate in the written Q&A. So now I'll pass it over to Asil.
Wonderful, thank you so much. I'd like to start by thanking our co-sponsors for this event. So within Williams, we've received wonderful support for holding this event from the Zilka Center, the Davis Center, the Root Eve Venture Group, Latinx Studies, the Lecture Committee, the Gaudino Fund, the Religion Department, Center for Learning and Action, the English Department, Geosciences, Africana Studies, Center for Environmental Studies, Biology, and the Chaplain's Office. I'm going to introduce myself. My name is Asila Bolhub. I use she, her, hers pronouns. I am the Assistant Director for Intergroup Relations and Inclusive Programming at the Davis Center at Williams. I'm also an alum with my friend and colleague, Caroline, from the class of 2015. I want to reiterate our gratitude for all of you for coming and joining us for this event. I'm going to share a little bit about how it came to be. So Caroline and I worked together on a college program called Root. Root is a student orientation program designed to raise questions and generate discussions about who we are, where we live, and how we interact with the various environments we occupy. We use environment to refer to rural and urban, natural and constructed, and sociocultural spaces that shape our interactions with each other and with the world. Root is structured around the understanding that the identities that we hold impact the way that we experience the environment and our access to resources. Without addressing the issues that are impacted by social identities and environmental inequities, we can't have a sustainable community, and we won't be able to sustain this planet. As such, a social justice approach, which actively interrogates power and resource inequities and works toward dismantling systems of oppression, is imperative for developing solutions to socio-environmental challenges and threats. Since Root could not take place, as it typically would this year, we wanted to create another space to critically engage with the issues that it brings to the forefront. So Caroline and I immediately thought of Adrienne and her work for such an event, as it offers practices and a larger vision for existing within structures of power and lineages of oppression while building a more just world. We are grateful to Adrienne for her time and her willingness to be with us today. I'm going to introduce her, and then afterward, students will introduce themselves, and then Adrienne will start us off with a few reflections before we go into a larger dialogue. Adrienne Maree Brown is the author of Pleasure Activism, The Politics of Feeling Good, Emergent Strategy, Shaping Change, Changing Worlds, and the co-editor of Octavia's Brood, Science Fiction from Social Justice Movements. She's the co-host of How to Survive the End of the World and Octavia's Parables podcast. Adrienne is rooted in Detroit. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to our first student, Michaela.
Hello, my apologies for the mask. I'm in a public library. My name is Michaela Foreman. I use she, her, hers pronouns. I am a junior this year at Williams College, which is insane. I'm from the great city of Chicago, Illinois, South Side. I'm an astrophysics major, as well as an English major. And I just wanted to acknowledge my gratitude for you, Adrienne, because you completely changed my academic trajectory. I thought I wanted to go into like physics research, but I honestly I spent this summer doing a little research into like the physical worlds of science fiction and how physics influences our psyche and how we can use physics as like a tool of social justice. And I would all say that's thanks to you. But next person.
Yeah, I'll pick it up, Michaela. Um, hi, I'm Isaiah Blake. I use any pronouns. It's fine with me. And um, I am a senior, which is daunting and crazy for everybody and me every day. I designed my own major at Williams. I'm a contract major for those, right, who are still confused about what that means, because I'm still confused about what that means, even though I'm a senior graduating with it. I designed my own major at the college, and the major is in critical Black geographies and Black geographies. So I am sort of thinking about that sort of the theories of Blackness at the same time, the theories of space and time and all that. I see Dr. Miche is in the chat. I mean, in the here watching with us. Hey, Dr. Miche, BG, we're here. We're doing it. You know. Um, I'm from Brooklyn. I'm here in Canarsie at my auntie's house, and I think that's it.
Hi, I'm Tali. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm a sophomore from New York, and I'm from in my room on campus right now. I'm a prospective American Studies and Theater major, and I took a class over winter study that Caroline taught about emergent strategy, which was a book, Michaela was in the class too, a book that I had read the summer before college that just kind of really changed the way I thought about myself and my place in the world compared to other people, and then read it again in this class once I was at school and changed my perspective again. And now that the world is so different from all these times I've read it, I am so excited to return back to a lot of the lessons from the book and see how we can, use them to envision just worlds as per the title of the talk. So super excited to be here. Pretty much a dream come true because this book just means so much to me. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Lauren. I use she, her pronouns. I'm a sophomore at Williams. I'm from Richmond, Virginia. My major is probably political science, maybe environmental studies, maybe religion. It's hard to say. I heard about this book and then I took this class last semester called Buddhist Economics, which was thinking about just like justice in economics through a religious framework, and just had me thinking a lot about like strategies for activism, which is when I read Pleasure Activism. It fully changed my worldview. And then Tali lent me her copy of Emergent Strategy. So yeah, I'm so excited to be here and talking with you.
I'm Niku Durafshi. I'm a senior. I'm from Williamstown, Massachusetts. So I've grown up in this college town. That's all I know. What else? I'm a geoscience major and I use she, her, hers pronouns. And I'm just really interested and excited to kind of step out of my sciencey, like take that hat off and kind of talk more about the communities and the people and like how all of that can come together, which I think is more important than what I might be learning in my science classes. So I'm excited to talk to you about all of that and have this discussion.
Hi everyone, my name is Rachel. I'm a senior. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I'm from Los Angeles. My major is environmental studies, Africana studies concentration. I'm really excited to be here. I think Adrienne Maree Brown's work is so important, especially when thinking about, what are some of the ways we can heal our communities, and the idea of interconnectedness that Octavia Butler especially espouses is super important. And so I'm definitely really excited for this conversation we're having. Yeah.
Hey everyone, I'm Gold. I use they, them pronouns. I'm from New Jersey, but I'm on campus right now. And I'm an American Studies major, also doing creative writing, poetry, and stuff like that. And yeah, I first heard about emergent strategy when I was at a conference in Immokalee, Florida. I organized with the Student Farm Worker Alliance for the past 2 years. So yeah, I was there. And some people from SFA are in the chat too, which I'm excited about. Shout out to them. And I was in Immokalee, Florida, the first time I've been in like any kind of movement space. And someone was actually reading emergent strategy there, and everyone's like, "You haven't heard of emergent strategy?" I'm like, "Yeah," I'm like, "Sorry." And then finally read it, and of course was everything that they made it out to be. And then for pleasure activism, I used to work at a bookstore in high school, and I remember pre-ordering it, like getting my employee discount and all that, and I was very excited. And when it came in, it was only my book and one other book, and I was like, "We need to get more copies of this. Like, why do we only have 2 copies of this?" And I was really sad about it. But then, like a few weeks later, once it hit the New York Times bestseller list, we had a huge stack, and I was like, "I told you so." But yeah, that's my little interaction with your work. I also took a class with Michaela called Beyond Cli-Fi, which was about climate fictions, and like we read Parable the Sower and lots of things like that, and it was a great class. Yeah. And I think I'm handing it back over to you, Adrienne.
All right. Hi, everyone. It's such a pleasure to be here. It never gets normal to show up in a space and have everyone like, "I read your book." I still feel like I'm just like, "Wow, really?" Because it's so nerdy, and like, let's nerd out. So let's nerd out a little bit. I'm grateful to be here with you all, and just want to offer gratitude that you are engaging the work and engaging in what I think of as like mindfully taking on the work of being in the apocalypse, like actively being in a great turning, a great change. That to me is what all of my work is really about, is like, this is a time when we can shape the future, or we can be overwhelmed by the present, and we have a choice. And which one is it going to be? Some days it's a little bit of both. So I wrote down some notes to guide me, which may or may not, we'll see what happens. But we are living in this moment, which I keep describing it as like, it would be considered bad fiction if it was a television show, or if it was something, it would just be like, it doesn't make sense. And I've been describing it this way for like the past several months. And then this popped up in my memory on social media from 3 years ago. So I just want to read this to y'all, because it's like, what? We already have seen this coming. So we are living in impossible times. If it were fiction, it would be critiqued as hyperbolic. If it were nightmares, we would never sleep. We are living in times created by our own species. I can't remember the last time my tears weren't man-made. It feels like everything is broken. We must, each of us, fix our attention on the nearest wound, conjure within us the smallest parts of ourselves that are still whole, and be healers. Heal with words and prayer and energy, heal with money, clean water, time, and action. There's enough destruction. There's enough nothingness swallowing the living world. Don't add to it. There's enough. Our visions are ropes through the devastation. Look further ahead like our ancestors did. Look further, extend, hold on, pull, evolve. So I got happy to see that, because I'm like, this is what I believe, right? Is I deeply believe that we are living inside of other people's imaginations. Someone else imagined the world in such a way that this was the inevitable result. If you imagine a world that is organized according to race and racism, then this is the inevitable result. If you imagine a world in which the resources don't have to be, you don't have to be in right relationship to the resources that you remove from the planet, this is the inevitable result. If you imagine a world where you only have value based on what you can produce for other people, this is the inevitable result. So all of that is an imaginary way of seeing the world. It doesn't have to be the truth. And many of us have
lineages that go back to indigenous peoples who didn't see the world this way and didn't function in the world this way. So there's a reaching back and a reaching forward, Sankofa, right? It's like, how do we actually see ourselves in a much longer lineage? And the first place that my work always starts is with visionary fiction, is we have to actively get in the game of imagining the next world, the new world, the many new worlds. And one of the ways I think of it is that each of us has a part of the story. There's not one singular story, but many, many stories that we have to figure out, how do these balance and coexist? So in order to see beyond the moment that we're in, we have to not just get engaged with fighting over a slightly better oppression, which I think is what we get engaged in. Like a year like this, election years are always these years where it's like, do you want that oppression or like a slightly better oppression? Like, and then people get rabid about fighting for the slightly better oppression. And I'm like, we have to get ourselves out of that cycle. And I very much view elections as a harm reduction practice, right? I'm like, a nation that was founded on the oppression of my people could never actually be committed to my freedom. I know that. So I don't look at it as that's my political home. I look at it as, oh, how do I do the harm reduction necessary so that I have more room in order to be a visionary, more room in order to create the next world? And I think one of our responsibilities, and one of the responsibilities of this next generation, your generation, the generations after, is to keep our eyes on a visionary prize, not just survival, but something that is a destiny, a purpose, a reason that humans exist, a compelling future that we would want to be part of. Right? Another piece of this is the emergent strategy part of it. And I was on sabbatical when this pandemic started. So I'd been pushing, doing all this work. And then I was supposed to be on 6 months of being on a beach. I packed 2 suitcases with only books and 2 bikinis and a sarong. And I was like, I'm only going places where this suitcase is a relevant suitcase. And then I'm on my journey. It's going amazing. I'm like finding myself, sleeping and everything. And then it's a pandemic, right? So adaptation starts right away. And what I was excited about is that I've been practicing adaptation and practicing being with change. So it was still a mess. It was still hyper disruptive. It's not like I was like, it's all good. Change is got, that's not what happened. I was like, holy, I got to change. But because I had been practicing and expecting, I was like, how can I adapt with kindness? How can I adapt towards what I love and care about? How can I adapt in ways that take care of other people and not just myself? So the adaptations have been at different levels. And I think that's important to name. Even now, privilege really determines what kind of adaptation you're having to do, right? So, your biggest adaptation might be, I have to wash my hands longer. I have to wear a mask sometimes. Like I have to change my schedule, right? I can't travel everywhere. That's one level of adaptation. Other people are having to adapt how they let go of someone, right? There are people who, I just had another comrade of mine pass away this past week. And I know that they died without everyone around them, that they died without people being able to reach them. This is a huge adaptation for our species to make, is that we can no longer assume that we will be held or with others when we pass. We can't assume that we'll be able to take care of people when they get sick. We might have to be at a distance. My father got sick a couple weeks ago, and it was like, oh, I have to sit here in this waiting room and just trust people that I've never met before. Where normally, I'm a Virgo oldest child, I would be all up in there like, excuse me, what you said you're doing what? I'm going to Google that and I'm going to become the expert. Like I'm the horrific, annoying visitor. But none of that's possible. Now it's a totally adapted state. And instead of trying to push against the adaptation, it's how do I partner with this adaptation? How do I partner with this adaptation in a way that moves myself, my family, and my community forward? Some other pieces that are going on, transformative justice has been popping all the way off during this time. So something about the container and the pressure of the pandemic has allowed for this explosive energy towards transformative justice, towards abolition, towards a right relationship with justice. I think a lot of people are putting together puzzle pieces, right? We're like, oh, wait a second. This isn't just isolated incidences. The pandemic and the way that Black and brown people are suffering under this pandemic is not an isolated thing from the ways that we suffer under the police state. We're putting together these pieces in new ways. And it's been incredible to watch the movements. My primary work when I'm not writing has been facilitation for the past few years, 20 years, I guess. I was like, few is not the same when you're talking to people who are in the 20-year-old range. So for the length of your whole lives, I have been facilitating for Black liberation movement. And I love doing facilitation for Black liberations. And it's been really mind-blowing to get to sit and watch all the planning and the dreaming and the relationship building and the alignment work come into fruition, where people said, this is a moment where we can actually advance things. So always pay attention that even in these moments of great pressure and what seem like limitations, there's openings. And those who are collectively oriented in their strategies, they will be able to find their way through those openings like octopus, right? There's always an escape, but you might have to release every single structure in your body to make that escape. Right now, I see us doing that. How do we release everything that we've thought of as bone, we've thought of as only breakable, right? How do we release all that and be like, we're still whole, even if we have none of those structures in place? If we're completely amorphous, if we're completely fluid, we're still connected. And I think a lot of us are learning that in really interesting and beautiful ways. Another way emergent strategy is showing up is in the fractal nature of it all, right? That each person has to do their part. And right now we are suffering because so many people won't do their part, right? So there's a little bit of fractal judgment happening over here. I know for sure that I'm like, I'm over here doing the mask and the hand wash and the distance and everything, and you can't wear a mask, you know, that kind of stuff. And not the people who literally can't wear a mask, because there's some people who like, that's not an option, but that's not the majority of people who aren't wearing masks. And so what we see is how important individual decision-making is inside of a fractal structure, right? That even if I do everything well, I might die because of someone else's fractal decision-making, right? So we're interconnected and our interdependence is so clear. If you've never noticed it before, if you've never believed in interdependence before, right now it's like interdependence is on shine. Interdependence is like, look, you literally don't, you're not an individual. There's a beautiful podcast that my friend Prentice Hemphill does called Finding Our Way, which I highly recommend. And the most recent guest on there is another friend, Alexis Pauline Gumbs, who is an outstanding mind, heart being, and who, by the way, her new book is coming out called Undrowned. It's lessons, Black feminist lessons from mammals, from marine mammals. It's everything. But she said in this, we are not individuals, and we have to stop thinking of ourselves as individuals. We have to always think of ourselves as the smallest unit is our relationships to each other, is our collective, is our community, who we rely on and who can rely on us. So I've been thinking a lot about who do I give care to and who do I receive care from? Who do I give care to? Who do I receive care from? And how can I let that inform my definition of community rather than having it be this massive kind of amorphous, you know, the people, the community, right? It's like, no. It's actually very specific people who I count on and who can count on me. And if I lost that grouping of people, which Octavia Butler is always preparing us, right? You may not end up in the apocalypse with the people you plan to. You may end up with some whole other people. So how do you continue to give and receive care, to notice the care you need, to notice the care that others need? How do you stay in right relationship with care? I think the last piece that I'll cover, and then let's get into this, is pleasure, right? Pleasure during the pandemic has, for many of us, been a survival tool, and it's changed a lot. So I think one thing that the pandemic has done for a lot of us is clarified what our pleasures actually are that we took for granted, right? For me, I've always known that I travel a lot, and complained about travel. I've loved to travel. Now I know for sure that one of the great pleasures of my life is being able to freely travel. And I can feel how difficult it is for me. And, you know, I had this realization a few years ago that I'm like, I'm one of the freest Black women that ever lived, ever. And all of the Black women alive right now are also, we're all amongst the freest Black women and the freest non-binary people and the freest trans people and the freest, all, like, we are all the freest iteration that's ever happened of ourselves, of our species. There's the least binding, there's the least conceptual binding, there's the most confronting of construct, right? So inside of that, to be limited again, to have container, and it's a containment that I have to opt into. Like, no one is holding me captive. I have to be like, I'm just gonna stay in my house then. I guess I'll just stay in this freaking house or whatever. And inside of that, I've had to then become creative in a new way. If you look at people who have served long-term prison sentences, they have been teaching us this forever and ever, right? Is any space can become a liberated space if you set your mind to liberating in that space. And now we are all having to figure out, how do we do that? How do we learn from those who have spent decades in confinement? How do we learn to liberate in the ways that are available to us? That is a pleasure activism. And I find small pleasures are opening the doors for me. The physical pleasures, a bath has become a spa, an ocean, you know, an adventure, a lake, you know, like it has to be all the water that I get to have. I have to bring that energy into bath, right? And drinking some tea, you know, I have to create restaurant-like experiences for myself occasionally and not just like shove things directly from the fridge into my mouth. Sometimes I need to light candles, sometimes, right? So I think for everyone, it's tuning in to like, you are not surviving this pandemic without pleasures. Pleasures are fundamentally part of how you are surviving. And how do you honor the survival that you're doing? How do you turn up the pleasures that you are cultivating in your life? How do you make your space into a space of pleasure? I have cleared, and I was like, I don't need any of this stuff. I only need what brings me pleasure. And like a nice broom. Like, that's it, nothing else, right? So I think those are all the things I'm gonna say at you, and then let's dialogue. One thing that helps with dialogue is coming off mute.
Period. So this is, I mean, there's questions that are sitting in the Q&A section. Before I think we get to them, I just want to say, one, thank you so much for that moment of just like reflection that you brought into that, because I mean, we had a conversation, right, like, you know, last week about like just preparing to talk to you, and we were just talking to one another through ideas, right, through time, through space, through what we've been dealing with. But like just hearing you sort of in some ways, right, just like add again sort of amen to everything that we're saying, sort of I feel really validated by what you're saying, and I'm sure I speak for a lot of people who are watching right now who feel the exact same way.
Lovely.
I'm gonna say one more thing. Sorry.
Okay.
Yeah. This is just to sort of warm everybody else up.
Okay. Warm them up.
Right. Like, and this, I think this is sort of, and for you, Adrienne, this is sort of a context about Williams, right? Right. So part of our conversation last week was just about how we bring our university, our college space, into the sort of work that you've done. Right? Sort of the ideas that you've put on the table, right? And sort of course, I think one of the things that, like, I remember growing up, people telling me this, and of course, before I got to Williams telling me this, and then something that I also started telling Williams people, right? Like, get out of your head, right? And I think that students, right, have actually always tell each other this, or tell ourselves that, right? Like, how can we move what we're learning into theory, into action, into work, right? Because we're always really invested into theory. So just, you know, I know we all on the call, right, are just like super nervous, right? We're sort of before, you know, 73 other people, right? We're also before this like phenomenal artist, author, and and person in the movement, but I just want to sort of just open us up to, even if we want to stretch, take a deep breath
That's
together
right.
into the conversation to sort of warm ourselves up. I'm usually good at that. So if everybody just
That's
wants
right.
to stretch.
No, that's super helpful. And, I mean, I think the thing that's helpful to remember too is no matter what I have or will accomplish in life, like I'm also a human being who's in the same things, right? Like we're all doing the same things. I don't know how we're gonna survive. I need to stretch more often and drink water, like we're all just, everybody poops,
Let's meditate on that, right?
If I may, I have tried. I'm really invested in creating a space on campus that incorporates a lot of your ideas, but I'm wondering, how do I create a space for healing? Because I require so much healing before I can do anything. Like this pandemic, the state of the world. I don't feel like I'm a use to anybody right now.
Yeah.
But I'm interested in how you think we should get there and how I can get there with other people, for other people.
That's great. That's great. Every healing path is a different healing path. Like it really is in direct relationship to what kinds of trauma you've experienced and when and for how long and all those things. So every single path is different. And in this moment, what you just said of like, oh, I don't feel like I'm of use to anyone in this state, that is actually one of the first liberating thoughts that you could have towards a healing path. Because I think a lot of times we don't have the humility to just be like, I'm not good right now. Like, I'm not actually, I think of it always for me, it's like, how full is the cup from which I'm trying to pour towards anyone else? And if I'm not self-aware that my cup is on empty, that my cup has no droplets left even, that I need to refill that, then if I'm trying to just project, oh, I'm offering some kind of healing wisdom, it's fragile. And I really think right now we have to be developing a robustness in ourselves versus a fragility. Like, I think even when we think about how we hold our identities and our hurts and everything, I want to hold it in a robust way. I'm a robust living person. I don't want to be cultivating in myself a fragility because I want to be able to survive. And my healing for me is directly related to that surviving. I don't just want to be here. When I say I want to survive, I don't just want to be here, cooking rats on a skewer with a red sky. Do you know what I'm saying? I'm not here for the road, right? I want healing. When I think of winning, what I mean is healing. And some of the tangible steps, there's been a ton of meditation retreats available that people are putting out for free or low cost. There's a lot of them that are like BIPOC only. I really think that if you can get into one of those retreats, there's one coming up at the end of this month, I think the 27th through 31st from Spirit Rock, that is a BIPOC specific meditation retreat that Larry Yang is putting out. But one of the first steps towards healing is getting quiet, being able to actually get quiet, sit with yourself and see what is in there, right? And meditation, the biggest trick of meditation is there's very few parts of it that are like, I'm calm. That's not what happens. You sit down, you close your eyes, and then chaos ensues. And the meditative act is the practice of going in this chaos. I take another breath. I bring my attention back to my breath. I'm not that chaos. I am not my mind. I am not my anxiety. I am this spiritual being inside this life. And how am I doing inside of it? So the first part is just creating space for yourself to drop into that stillness. I love the Insight meditation app. You can do a 2-minute meditation and it can change your whole life, change your whole day. I'm also recommending that same friend Prentice Hemphill, who I mentioned earlier, has started a series on Instagram called Street Somatics and offers healing practices, basic centering practices, basic things that people can do. The most interesting gift of this pandemic is tons of healers and practitioners are making offers for free that they normally wouldn't make and making offers online that they normally wouldn't make. And then the final thing I'll say on this is therapy, 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 therapy. I am such a fan of therapy. I would not be here without therapy. Therapy, therapy, therapy. Like, I'm such a fan. While I was on sabbatical, I was using Talkspace, and I highly recommend it. It's like an app where you can just go and be like, I'm having a bad day, and like, and just type everything out. For me as a writer, it was really helpful to just be able to like pour out all the stuff that was going on and have someone who interacts, you know, on their own time back. But you can also do video messages on there. You can leave audio messages. You can book live sessions. There's a lot more apps like that. And then if you can get a real-time therapist, a lot of them are booked right now, but it just helps to have someone who is holding your hand on the journey, finding someone who will look at you without judgment when you share your worst thoughts from your worst day. And just be like, it's actually okay. It's totally human. Healing is a lifelong journey. It helps to have a team.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for asking that vulnerable question.
Thanks, Michaela. I think we should move into some of the questions that are beginning to populate. This as a means of creating a dialogue between us so that we don't have the sort of the responsibility of that together. And maybe it might be a cool idea to move in the sort of order that they came in, just to give respect to those who might have been waiting from the beginning. So an anonymous attendee, wonderful name. I love that. I love the anonymous. I just love that for some reason. Does having empathy for those who aren't yet woke, important? How do you act against ignorant culture? And it also seems that empathy is going to be a continued work that we're going to be working through. But does having empathy for those who aren't yet woke have importance? How do you act against an ignorant culture? Open that up for everybody.
Yeah.
I guess I could ask a question to that and then see how people, to that. I think everybody's trying to move through empathy, right? Is in a sort of culture that's also, especially not even a culture, but a time that is really asking us to move and prioritize the self. But it's so strange, right? Because we're dealing with this strange balance, right? Take care of yourself, save the world from a pandemic. So it's just like, how do we balance that? So, yeah. And then how do we take that into the political field, right? So I think that's another way. Like, what are y'all thinking about that?
Yeah, I'll say briefly, maybe as a spark to see what comes, is I think it's a great practice to try and have empathy for all human beings. And the way that I understand empathy is to try to understand and share someone else's feelings. And my limitation there is I don't want to share your feeling of racism. I don't want to share your feeling of oppressive instinct. I'm not interested in sharing that. I have empathy with whatever hurt led you to that disconnect from your humanity. And that's where I can try to sideways come into it. The way that I survive ignorance culture is I understand it's all trauma response. It's all trauma response. I don't know if y'all can hear that, but my turtle is burrowing right now, which they only do when I'm on a phone call with a lot of people. Yeah.
I think when you're talking about balance, this reminds me of something we talked about when we had our little preparation call about urgency and how to balance things that feel like, if we don't take action right now, everything's going to explode, which can, everything can feel that way. And we were talking about how, there are people who have been organizing and fighting for things since before the pandemic. It felt like kind of everything was halted and there were all these new things to organize for that felt even more urgent. Yeah. So, it's like balancing empathy and healing, but also balancing, how to kind of prioritize the work you're doing when there's so many things that feel so overwhelming, which I know is something you write about in Emergent Strategy, that there's like always enough time for the work that needs to get done. Yes. But I was wondering if you or anyone had any thoughts about is there always enough time for everything when everything feels so urgent and so big and we can feel so small, especially when we can't, gather in group spaces with, our whole organization when it's just kind of on us isolated. Like, how can we continue that momentum and urgency, but while also practicing empathy and healing?
Yeah, I mean, the thing that helps me is to remember that everything big is made up of small things. So no matter how big the problem is, it's not one big thing. It's many, many small decisions creating that problem, creating that issue. And if I'm going to respond to that, then I have to be willing to make all those small and sometimes seemingly mundane choices, right? Like recycling, composting, those kind of things feel very mundane. But if everyone was actually in that practice, all of a sudden we would have a sea change of our relationship to the planet and the climate. So there's these things, that seem mundane. And then the urgency piece is really interesting because when you unhook from the 24-hour news cycle, the urgency immediately lessens. So trying to figure out what is the true urgency versus the false urgency. The true urgency that needs attending to is about the quality of relationship we have to where we are, where we live. How do we attend to the land? The true urgency is how we relate to each other. How do we break the cycles of harm? There's a false urgency that's being constantly given to us that distracts us from the things that are truly urgent. When you're truly doing urgent work, you can kind of clearly see, here's what my part of this urgent work is, and you do it. In a false urgency paradigm, it's almost impossible to see any action that would be useful. So that's how, to me, I'm like, that's how you can always assess. If you're like, I can't even figure out what to do right now, it's like, okay, you're in someone else's game. You need to step back onto your own playing field. You need to figure out, hold on, where am I trying to get to? My destiny is to take root amongst the stars on this planet, which is floating amongst the stars. That's my destiny. How do I be at that pace? How do I do that work? There's not always enough time to respond to every stupid thing. No, thank God.
I think, speaking of every stupid thing, and not that this question is dumb, but I think many of the people who embody this
I hope not.
But this question, it says, how can straight white men use their societal power to push society forward besides providing opportunities for marginalized groups to voice concerns and have an audience? I think that's a powerful question. I think it's a question that we hear a lot, right?
Yes.
And as people, as people of color, as I don't think there are any white men on this group, straight white men on this group. Nope, there isn't. I just checked right on this video. I think, right, that question, the how, right? I want to start off by saying, I think what we've been offered by speculative fiction, by Octavia Butler, is that we've got to abolish the how can straight white men question. In that, right, we are moving into a time and into a point where it's no longer generative to start that, to ask that question. Like, I get it, right? I really fully understand it, and I'm not actually shaming the question, right?
Yeah.
But what I am saying is that I think that we are all capable. I think the work that we've been reading, that we're moving through, is capable of a form of imagining a new question, right? That questions are generative, that questions have power, and that there comes a time where there may not be no such thing as a stupid question, and I'm not shaming the question. However, I do think there's a time where our questions have the power to open up universes. And so, right, sitting in the identity is sort of, how do you not self-shame in your question asking, right? But saying, what can you do, right? I think the work that we've all sort of seen through emergent strategy, seen through pleasure activism is, what can I do, right? But not, how can this body, right, which is sort of helping me in this conversation, sort of be generative and helping these people in this, it's just like, it's sort of, I think that as a non-white straight man, I begin to get exhausted, but in some ways frustratingly prepared for this question, right? And I also think that we all sort of take on this modality where we're just like, you ready for the, how can straight white men participate in this work question? And then we all turn in. I actually want to start by saying, we need a new, we are getting now so many technologies of care. We are being given so many technologies, right, that are not just Zoom. And I just really think about the imagination, right? The power of the dream that could sort of make us go way beyond this limiting question of the body. First of all, I should say, straight men, white men, go read an Octavia Butler book.
Well, that's what my answer is always listen and read. Yeah. I did a series on the How to Survive podcast. I did an episode that I think is just on listening. And it's 2 essays, one that I wrote for white people and one that I wrote for straight men. and it's mostly just listen and read. You're not the center of things. And as a non-center, right, as a decentering body, that's what you're trying to do to yourself, is decenter yourself from a narrative that has overly centrified you and in a way that endangers every other identity. As a decentered body, you have to take on the responsibility of doing the labor of researching, the labor of listening, and the labor of reading. And there's so much to read. There's so many reading guides. There's so many curricula. There's so many experts on this work. And so whenever I hear that question, I'm like, oh, you still don't want to listen and read yet. But it's okay, because listening and reading is always available to you. Rachel, I saw you kind of coming off mute a couple of times, and I wondered if that was a tease that you were going to say something.
Yeah, I honestly, I do see something very concrete that straight cisgendered white men can do, and that is to turn away from, the military industrial complex. Like, it is so concerning to seeing like these young men looking for places of community. They've turned to, these militias, they've turned to QAnon, they've turned to groups, they turned to the military. And it's like, our US military system actively oppresses, represses, suppresses, like, damn near every country. And I think, there are groups of white men who are upset that they're not necessarily guaranteed a salary job with benefits. They don't have 401ks. They don't necessarily have the same opportunities that they may have once had. And it's like they really need to take this resentment they have towards minorities and towards marginalized people and sit with themselves and think of, okay, maybe I can reach out to people in my community and turn them away from, this entire war machine, because that's actively holding us back with environmental justice, racial justice, and, capitalism is dependent upon war.
Beautiful. Thank you.
I think my answer to the question would, I was thinking about it for a long time as you all were speaking, but then I was like, they should just go to therapy, like we were saying before, because I feel like
everybody needs healing.
Yeah, everybody. No, everyone needs healing. And I feel like sort of these narratives act like the violence of committing all this harm comes out of nowhere and isn't just is just the nature of this type of person, and is not at all, and processes of therapy and just reflecting on just why people have these feelings and why you feel the need to really ask this question so directly.
Beautiful. What's another question?
I have a question I'd like to ask, and that is about during the time of the pandemic, obviously physical intimacy, which is something you talk a lot about in pleasure activism, yes, has changed so much. And there's a whole new level of shame associated with that that hasn't been before. And that's shame is something that pleasure activism was working to overcome. And I'm wondering how you're thinking about your work, teachings now through the lens of the pandemic.
Yeah, I mean, I think something that's really helpful in this time is that this is not the first time that people who are alive have had to go through a massive pandemic experience that impacted intimacy. So I grew up in the wake of the HIV/AIDS, moving through all of the communities and taking so many people and requiring a sea change of shift in behavior in intimate space, of being able to ask for a condom, ask someone if they've been tested, ask someone if what their HIV status was, and beginning to have conversations in a way that was oh, what you and I do here in this intimate moment, or this group intimate moment. What we do will determine potentially whether we live or die after this experience, which is similar to what we're having now. And the difference was how things were transmitted, right? So it was actually a more intimate transmission process. This one is a broader transmission process. And I think a lot of the same skill set, sorry, my phone is right here and I have it for my notes and it keeps falling down. The same skill set is required, right? Is, can I be the person who broaches the conversation? Can I get good at bringing it up without a bunch of fanfare, which I think is important, right? It's like, I'm not, I don't want to feel like I'm pulling teeth or doing anything when I'm like, have you been tested recently? Right? I just want to get good at that question. Like, of course, we both should talk about how we've been tested recently. We both should talk about a pod. We both should talk about the safety mechanisms that we're taking on a regular basis. And there's been some really beautiful tools developed that allow people to articulate, here's the risk level that I'm at, right? I'm at a 1, you know, I still go out to, or no, I think 1 is the lowest risk. So it's like 1 is like, I stay in my home. I don't go to any kind of mass events. I wear a mask and gloves every time I go out. I wash my hands on 10, blah, blah, blah. And then a 5 is like, I still go out in public. I don't have a clear pod. I sometimes wear a mask, sometimes don't, whatever it is. And then you start to be able to have a conversation. I find a lot of people are slowly dipping their toes back into dating stranger world, like figuring it out through apps and figuring it out. And humans, one of the places we are the fastest to adapt is when it comes to getting laid. So humans figure it out. They're like, I will not be not getting it. So how are we going to figure this out? And I've seen a lot of people do stuff where they're like, okay, we are going to create, you know, we're going to talk long enough to decide we want to create a pod with each other. And the trust levels, right? You're trusting, you're trying to learn, how do I trust you to uphold and do what you said you were going to do? I'm seeing also people who are engaging in negotiating for physical relationships with people who they might not have in the past, but because of proximity, because of availability, because of the limitations. And I've heard of a number of very interesting entanglements unfolding during the pandemic. And then I also have seen a lot more attention given to self-pleasure, self-touch, self-massage, self-care in that way. So a lot more people talking about the importance of masturbation, the importance of being in right relationship with your own body and giving yourself total permission to experience release and pleasure, but that's not the only thing that we need. Like, actually learn how to give yourself self-massage. There's a whole flow from Qigong that I did. I was in Hawaii for 3 months in total solitude, no human contact. That's never happened before in my life. And I had a Qigong practitioner who taught me how to do this whole series of self-massage that goes all the way down the body. And it became something that I looked forward to every day, that I started increasing each day. Like, I'll do that series again because I just so needed literally the feeling of a palm against my skin. And I think it's so important that people not set that to the side or leave it to the side, but continuously use it as a way to release the overwhelming pressure that's coming, right? The knot that's building up in us, wherever it's building, it needs to be regularly released so that we can stay flexible and adaptable and able to move when we need to move. Good question.
Thank you.
I think the next question is closely related, and it asks, how are you navigating the new forms of connection and community created by constantly holding the same physical space as the same people? How do we live in pods with these values?
That's great. You know, I had the beautiful experience of getting to live with my partner and my parents. It was my first time living with my partner, and then I was living with my parents who I had not lived with since I left home for college. And that's intentional because they're parents, you know, and I'm a grown ass woman, right? But getting to, as soon as the pandemic stuff started popping off, I knew that I wanted to be with them. Like, I was like, I really want to be with my parents. And I had been planning to be with my partner and wanting to be with my partner as well. And so we created a little pod. And I will say the practices that felt the most important were, how do I communicate very directly? Like, what is it I actually need in this moment? And I want to say that distinctly, like not theoretical needs, because I think a lot of times we can get into like negotiating theoretical, someday, what if this happens? And I find that that's not useful in this time because things are changing so fast. The future is very foggy. But in this moment, you can articulate what you need, what you want, what you don't want, and not assuming constant togetherness is the best practice, right? But actually making sure everyone has their space to still get some solitude, not assuming that everyone's going to want to do the same things, and giving each other permission to all have our own space. And then I have this big practice in my life of just like no small talk. Small talk exhausts me. And my parents come from a generation where like that's the way that you show love, is just the small attending to through conversation. And so what I found myself doing, the practice I moved into, was, how do I deepen into the conversations I need to be in? How do I deepen the conversations I'm in with them? When someone asks me how I am, how do I give a deep and true answer rather than a small and surface answer? And that has become, it's changing my relationship with everyone. I've also entered into a practice now of, there's a number of weekly calls I have that are personal. So I think I've done that for work many times. It's like, oh, my staff call, my this call, my that call. But now I'm like, this group of friends, we have a regular call. And this other group of friends, we have a regular call. And then my family has a regular call. And I love this, that I feel like I'm finally prioritizing my personal relationships at least at the same level, if not higher than my professional productive relationship.
On that note, oh, sorry.
No, Tali, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, on that note, are there ways that you kind of adapt your professional organizing work in this virtual world? Because, when you were talking about that, I was thinking about like maintaining connections, which I think can be really hard when, you're on a Zoom screen with 100 people and everyone's having their different Instagram posts and this and that. If there's things you found to be particularly helpful for you to continue work and connecting with people. I know you've been doing a lot of podcasting. Anything?
Yeah, I mean, I've done, my life was starting to shift already last year. When I went on sabbatical, I knew that I was no longer interested in like being the center of a room or running a room in the ways that I had been doing. But I will say that big adaptations I've been making have been choosing when it's present time. So I ran a facilitation training. Normally when I do those, it's like 4 days, nonstop togetherness from like 9 a.m. to 5 or 6 p.m. And it's like deep relationship building. We're just falling in love with each other and like, but it turns out that nobody should spend that much time on any kind of device ever. And you can't build the relationship by more time in the digital realm. So I did the training as a 4-hour training instead, with a 1 hour time that people were in small group conversation. And I got really positive feedback. But what I found was I was able to cover the same ground in a lot of ways. Like it's like, how is this possible? I got much more essential. The people got much more essential. And what it's made me realize is I think that we waste so much time not being present. And when we are present, so for this, it was like, put everything else down, just be here for this. But you only have to be here for this long, but truly be here. Don't be half here. I don't want half of anyone's attention, right? Either be here or be elsewhere. That attention liberation work. And it was really good for me to notice that, because I'm like, I may never again do a training that's 8-9 hours long in a day. Like maybe that's always been too much trying to sustain attention. Maybe I'll always keep it at this shorter thing, but ask for deeper presence. So that feels like a really big lesson.
I know we have a question population. I just want to add a question to that.
Uh-huh.
Do you feel exhausted you know, because I've been a person who also, but yes, you could be like, yes, right? But
Everybody's like, yes.
but like, actually, I've always had it be a practice of mine to sort of be present. And then also my mentor, so she calls it nervous chatter, right? Small talk, right? And it's also, and I know that a lot of people at Williams are just like, I need to bring it back to Williams and be like the sort of nonsensical stuff that Williams students do, right? That of course I could be guilty of, but it's just like, how was your summer? How terrible is your life? And it, like, you know, it's sort of how the sort of normalcy of nervous chatter is at Williams, where people are just
Yeah.
like, how terrible are things going for you? And then someone goes, really terrible. Is it terrible for you? Like, I'm of course making a joke of it, but that's somewhat how it goes. And so, but that's sort of the rules practice. And so I always made it a practice of mine as well, to just be like, I'm not doing that. Like, I just disinvolve myself in practice, or I would subvert it and be like, terrible means, right? Like, it would just be like, I just like, you know, like just really try to break through this sort of desire to sort of quick and dirty a conversation, right?
Yeah.
I felt like it was quick and dirtying everything, including quick and dirty sex, right? And so my question to you is like, actually being a person, maybe it's not do you feel exhausted, but do you feel exhausted and maybe lonely as well in that practice, right? Of being really active, because I really do.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is interesting. Like, I think when I first started to recognize that I wanted depthful or solitude, you know, I'm like, I have a lot to say. I have a lot that I'm thinking, but I want to either be in conversations where it's like, let's be philosophical, let's be political, let's be action oriented, let's like move some big stuff. Or I'd rather just watch the Real Housewives of Potomac, you know, like, or Atlanta or whatever, you know, like for me, I'm like, I'd rather, if I'm going to get small talk, I'd rather have it be entertaining and just totally trash. Like, let's just call it what it is. Or I want a high degree. And so I find I need off time, on off time. So I think about that too. And like with people, when I am around people where I'm like, okay, small talk is your thing, I'm not going to change you. Because I think that's the other thing is me changing doesn't mean other people are going to change or have to change. It just means I'm saying, here's the kind of interaction I'm up for. So when I'm with people where I'm like, okay, this small talk is your thing, how much can I do and be in right relationship, right? How do I contain it in a way that still nourishes us both? And how do I provide opening to the kind of conversations I want to have with people? And if I'm exhausted, I say I'm exhausted. If it's overwhelming, I say that now, which I didn't used to do. I used to be very much like, everyone needs to think I've got it together all the time, but I just don't. And like, no one does. And if anyone seems to, they're lying to you. This is not a normal time. Like, there's nobody who this is not happening to. This is a complete, total, everyone is impacted by it. And so everyone is having a hard time and people are dealing with it in different ways. And for some people, you know, for instance, it used to be a thing where you go to the CVS or Walgreens or whatever little store, and I'd go in there like with my headphones on, just like, don't you talk to me. And now I do find I have a higher tolerance for a slight human interaction, right? Even if it's like, someone be like, what about that weather? Which normally is my pet peeve. I'm like, oh, why do we need to talk about what we can all see, you know? But now I'm like, yeah, what about it? You're a human. Oh my God. Like, you know what I'm saying? So there's also something about staying attuned to the fact that you are also changing. I'm also changing. I feel less exhausted when I'm not resisting myself changing. And so that change might be from energized to tired in an interaction, naming that. I don't fake it. You know, I don't fake it. I think about every interaction is like any intimate interaction. If you fake it, you're the only one who pays the cost for that, right? If you fake like being engaged when you're actually fucking tired, you're the only one who's going to be more fucking tired at the end of it. The other person's going to suck your energy like a vampire because you gave them permission. You were like, right here, please. So, yeah. So, yeah.
Okay, well, we have a lot of questions.
Okay.
So if no one else has any more thoughts on that one, I think we can move on to the next one.
All right.
Says, Hi, Adrienne mentioned practicing adaptation. How does one practice for the unpredictable? How does one develop a habitual healing practice from the unforeseeable?
That's good. That's a great question. I think a couple of things. One is Octavia teaches us that there's very little that is actually unforeseeable. So whether we can see or not is about the kind of attention that we're paying. And if we're not paying attention, then a lot of unforeseeable things happen to us. So one thing is to start paying attention to patterns. And I think about this a lot. I step back from, like, I'm not a good historian, but I'm a good pattern observer. So I will kind of step back and look at history and be like, oh, this is what always happens. Okay. Like this combination of, for instance, conservatism, fascism, racism, and militarization, they cluster together over and over and over in history. And they often do it in reaction to moments when it seems that humans are evolving. So we have a period of evolution, right? We have a sexual revolution, and then all of a sudden there's a huge conservatism that comes back. And then we have a queer revolution, and then all of a sudden it's like a crackdown, and then we have there's just this waves of ways. So for many of us, we were sitting during the Obama years and watching same-sex marriage pass and seeing these things and being like, okay, we can expect the pendulum to swing back this way, right? We don't know how, we can't predict the what, but we can definitely expect that there's going to be this pendulum and it will swing back the other fucking way, right? And one of my things that I'm most interested in is how do we not necessarily stop the pendulum, but get off the ride altogether? I think that the ride is based on us having things made into partisan issues that are actually human species issues. And so I'm like, how do we get off that ride? The other thing I think helps us prepare for the unpredictable is I say that almost, I have it tattooed on my body, God has changed, is to recognize that when the unpredictable happens, something divine might be afoot. And even if it seems like something goes against you or goes against your plan, right? It's like, I dropped a dozen eggs, right? And they cracked open. That's a crisis. But one of them was black and bad, which means probably several of them were bad, even if they didn't look bad. Thank God. So there's these things that happen where it's like, oh, how can I, instead of looking at this as my bad luck, look at it as the universe looking out for me, preparing me, keeping me good for the next thing. Now, that's an optimistic worldview. You can have a pessimistic worldview. It's still the same deal. The universe is up to something. Something is unfolding. But if you don't, I'm feeling super Buddhist these days too. And I think there's something about releasing attachment that also allows for the unpredictable to seem like opportunity, for the unpredictable, okay, this is just what is now. This is the new condition, and how do I shape the next one, right? If the unpredictable is always happening to you, that's a sign that you might need to drop in and pay attention, that you might not be on the path that you think you're on or the path that you need to be on.
I actually just kind of want to piggyback off of that.
Yes, piggyback.
I'm wondering, I'm not okay with change. Like quite personally, I find it very, very difficult. And
Yes.
I'm wondering, and I didn't get a chance to read Pleasure Activism, but I'm wondering, like, how am I gentle with myself in experiencing and adapting in that change?
Yeah.
I don't think I'm very gentle with myself when those things happen.
So question for you, Michaela. Do you feel like you're not good with change no matter where its source is from? So like if you create a change or you come up with an idea to change something, rearrange your room, for instance, are you not good with that?
I am not. But like I'm all for societal change, like revolution, let's hurry it up.
Great.
But like, it's sort of the incremental ones that I'm having issues with.
That's great. So I always ask this because most of us we struggle with changes we don't want and changes that were not our idea. And then when it's changes that either we created or we're longing for, we want that change. And then we're surprised that other people are so resistant to it or, ignorant. I think something that's helpful is just to acknowledge it. Like what you just did was beautiful, to be like, I'm not good with it. I say this all the time. I'm like, people think that I like love, they're like, Adrienne just loves change. I'm like, I love change that I came up with. I love the changes that I want to see. I love the communities I work with changing things. I hate the changes that have come from this administration. I hate the change of pace and urgency that this past 4 years has entailed. I don't enjoy these kind of changes. I don't think that when change is happening very rapidly and I can't get my breath, I don't like that kind of change. So the thing I often have to find myself doing inside of that is like, can I slow this down? Can I find my own pace inside of this larger change? And, I go through periods where I'll get off of social media or I'll limit it. Right now I'm in a relationship where I've limited it to like 15 minutes a day. And I'm like, there's too much change happening on the social medias. And I don't know if any of it's real. So I'm just going to opt out of that because I have changes I want to be making in my own life. Like I needed to change the location of my aloe vera plant. I needed to change some arrangements in my house so that my partner had enough room to hang stuff up. I need to change some things that are very immediate and doable. And then there's also the change of creativity. So I need to open myself up for the next idea that's supposed to come through, right? Because visionary fiction and pleasure activism and emergent strategy are at my back and I'm not done living. So there must be new ideas ahead. I have to make myself ready. I have to become ripe for new ideas to come to me, which means I have to have spaciousness. And I think that also really helps with right relationship to change, is being like, there's changes I want. How do I make room for those to happen? Right? Getting off the ride of obsession with other people's changes. Celebrity culture is a way of being obsessed with other people's changes. And I'm like, very few of them are worthwhile. Like Beyonce, her changes are of interest to me. Prince's changes were always interesting to me. There's people who I'm like, I want to watch you change. Meg Thee Stallion right now is one person I'm like, you are fascinating to me. Like the way you're changing in public is fascinating to me. But there's a lot of people who I'm like, you haven't ever actually really changed ever. Like you just stay in the public sphere taking up the same exact space. Why do you get public space? I don't know. So unhooking ourselves from these people who just take up space in our lives and our minds and our attention. And then we have more room to prepare ourselves for the kind of changing we want to be doing and making and part of. Mm-hmm. And you may never like it, and that's okay.
Thinking more about celebrity. Oh,
I'm so sorry. No, Gold, please go ahead.
no worries. Yeah. Thinking more about celebrity, I'm wondering what it's like to be a hashtag movement celebrity or something, because I feel like it must be a weird position.
Ooh, yeah.
Podcast, you were like, was it your like a kid or something was like, are you famous? And you were like, in some circles. And I thought that was like a way to.
That's how I process it. And that's true, right? So like there's certain circles or certain places that I'll go to where people are like, Adrienne Maree Brown. And then I go walk down the street in Detroit and people are like, get the fuck out of my way. So, it helps a lot to not be, for me, I don't think I would do well with the kind of celebrity of movie actor type people or whatever. But movement celebrity is a really bizarre thing because it ties into capitalist culture in a way that is, like I feel like I feel like this is something I've got to figure out in my lifetime because I never expected it. I was, I'm like, I'm a facilitator and kind of a writer who like writes weird things on my own blog. Like, so I'm not the kind of person who was like, I'm trying to be known. Like I've never done like a brand planning something or whatever. So it's been a surprise to me. And speaking, Michaela, like you said, I was like, this is a change I didn't want, right? I was like, no, just read the book and treat me like a normal person, right? So I think the thing has been to stay in touch with my normal personness, like, and stay in touch with the part of work that's like something does come through me that is very special. And I think it's available to everyone, right? But I have to also pay attention to like, oh, how have I been shaped in my life to allow these special things to come through me that feel like they're bigger than me? Like I read Emergent Strategy and I'm like, dang, how did you know that? You know, like I'm still trying to understand some of the stuff because I really opened the channel and let stuff come through. And so then when people are like, you're amazing, I'm like, it's no, Earth is amazing. Like ants are the bomb. Like, you know, like I am an amazing fan of life. And I think as often as I can, I use whatever energy is coming towards me to redirect towards like, look at the wondrous life we're in, or look at the wondrous ancestors we have. So redirect it. You know, I'm just like, you think I'm awesome. It's Octavia Butler you're actually crushed out on. Like, I'm just trying to like uplift her. You know, you are actually wild about Audre Lorde. And that's something that's just coming through in this work, you know. And I think each of us is actually a tapestry of the influences that shape us. And so we allow people to see, you know, I'm the woven together Grace Lee Boggs, Octavia, Nina Simone, like all the people, plus my grandmother, plus a little sprinkle of my other grandmother, you know, whatever. All that said, what I'm trying to do right now is harness the power of it, you know, to be like, okay, if 100,000 people are going to follow me something, what do I want to do with that? Right? How do I want to, you know, so far my thing has been, I want to use my spaces to uplift people. There's enough hardship. I want spaces that I'm inviting people into to be a place where they get to feel alive and get to feel pleasure, get to be reminded of wonder, and get to be called to action. That I'm not interested in a bunch of people who follow me, try to become me. I'm very interested in a bunch of people who notice me and it makes them become more themselves. And I think that there's a way to keep harnessing the attention in a way that, you know, kind of keeps reflecting it back. Like, you know, be the celebrity of your own life and your own circles, you know? Mm-hmm.
I wanted to just jump in because we have a hand raised. So I just wanted to make sure that we get to that. So
what does that mean again?
So someone has raised their hand to ask a question in real time, like not just
okay.
type the chat. So I just want to make sure that person has an opportunity to do so.
Great.
Hello?
Are they gonna arrive somehow?
Yes.
Like, okay, I'm gonna
Maybe
trust it.
they're muted.
Been an accident, possibly.
So you can now unmute yourself, the 68 Center for Career Exploration. If you have a question.
I guess we can move on.
Okay. Then we just go back to some of the
There's
other.
a question a little bit down that I think is really interesting for the panel. It's from a professor who says, a question to all of you from a teacher slowly learning to implement emergent principles into the classroom / our pedagogy practices. What do you want to see more of? Which one of the principles do you think is really important for the collective learning experience? So if any students have any answers to that?
Yeah, I think this is a really nice question because, you know, like with our transition of virtual learning, there's been a lot of challenges. I think something that's particularly important with engaging in like radical pedagogy was just focusing on the fact that, you know, like the student and the teacher are both there to solve a problem. Like we've seen how, like telling children to memorize facts, telling them to do XYZ without allowing them the space to like critically challenge and question, like the source of the information, why they're receiving this information, how is this going to help them in the future, has led to severe struggles with understanding things like media literacy, financial literacy, and we even struggle like with, if you could say, racial literacy. And so it's like when you step into the classroom, I think it's amazing to see a teacher who's vulnerable and is open to experiencing this process of learning with the student, which I think is so important. Yeah, there has to be a lot of changes for sure in the way we teach, and it could start with just asking questions, not necessarily having answers, but just asking critical questions.
I think for me, patience has been really important. I think that Zoom. There's a book called Bad Boys, Public School. It's a woman who wrote this book about public schooling in California, I think. And I actually remember reading it in my the summer before freshman year, and it was talking about, she made this binary between what we call bad boys, right? The making of, like, she was called the making of black masculinity or masculinity in public schools, right? So it was like bad boys and then good boys, right? So she's trying to study black masculinity as it develops in an elementary school setting. And I remember, like, in that time of my life, of course, I identified at Williams, right? I had to identify in some ways with the schoolboy, right? The person who sort of, right, as I would say, actually, I said after, right, there's a school to prison pipeline, and then we also have to be very clear about the school to college pipeline, right? Because there was a binary that was created, right? I remember growing up in elementary school and people actually teaching us, right? You have to do well on this exam because if you don't, they're making beds for you in prison. And we were like, oh my God, I need to get a 4 on this exam, right? Like the stakes were so high. But it birthed this extreme binary, right? Between some of us being bad and some of us, but some of us being bad, some of us being good, but all of us trying to run away from prison. But all of us also knowing at the same time that some of us were going. I think that was a very conscious understanding of 3rd graders and 4th graders in New York City public schools or wherever you heard that, where you were like, some of us are good, some of us are bad, some of us are going to pass, some of us are going to fail, and some of us are going to jail, right? And it was really terrible to sort of hear that the stakes. And I think what I think is necessary now is a level of care and patience, because I see that I'm turning into the bad boy. Meaning my anxiety is no longer controlled by my own ability to sort of discipline myself into a mute button. That shit is crazy, right? My manners that my grandmother beat into me or this person told me to do that I could go into, like I was like woke up in the morning, my parents told me all these good things that I need to do before I went into school at 8 o'clock in the morning. Now my aunt is still there, my mom is still there, and that structure is still present. So now I really do need a place to sort of lash out. And the classroom might just get that work, right? So it's just like, how do we really create, how do we really sort of begin to imagine that the internet, the computer is really becoming a material space, and we've got to be dealing with the material consequences. Like I said, I've been saying the only thing that you can't do between this thing is shoot somebody, but you can die in nearly every other way besides the physical death. And I think we have to be really, really paying attention to there's serious consequences to what is said and done on the internet. People have been saying that for a while, but now all of our lives, or 75% of our lives, are existing in this very thing. So we've got to be really, really attentive to how we are teaching. What were we addicted to? What did we like? And I believe that a lot of us were addicted to discipline and shame prior to this, and we've got to deal with that in the process of teaching people.
I think as far as teaching, I think one of the most important things is just understanding the context that you're teaching in. Like, I don't know what this person means by like, I'm just a teacher and I want to implement emergent practices, because it really depends just like on what's going on. And like also if it's a Williams College professor, just like knowing that this is Williams College and like this is an elite institution that people come to for a certain reason, like for many like specific reasons. So I don't know. I think that thinking about that just helps anything, but maybe you probably know that as a teacher already, but.
First of all, bonjour, madame. I just want to tell you that you're doing so well. I've taken her course, and we've talked about pedagogy, and you even asking this puts you leaps and bounds ahead of other Williams professors, just like completely. Second, I want to sort of like piggyback on Rachel's point. I've been using piggyback a lot. I want to build on Rachel's point, which I think gets a lot at like the idea of decentralization that comes out of emergent strategy. Like, we need to dismantle the structure that exists in academia. I am completely for that. I think the distinction between teacher and student is important, but like the power structure just like it doesn't work out, and that goes beyond the classroom. And I think one thing that would be really helpful for students from professors is just like you advocating to demolish that power structure beyond the classroom. Like the idea that you all have to report to like a chair of a department, sure, it probably like makes things easier, but like that's just another hierarchical structure that is inherently unnecessary and contributes to the hierarchical structure in the classroom, which also goes back to the like idea of fractals. So build your classroom essentially how you'd like to see academia built, because I'm very confident that if that change is made and you send these students out into the world and they pursue careers and professorships, like they will keep enacting that change, and eventually the system will just like fall apart because people will be doing other things. But yes, hello. I haven't seen you in so long.
Yeah, I'm wondering what Adrienne thinks of this question. And also, I just remember in pleasure activism, you were like, I do not do academia. Like this writing is not academic writing. And like, we're very.
Yeah, I mean, I don't do academia. I do independent scholarship, and I went to college, I went to Columbia. And I think when I say that I don't do academia, a lot of what I mean is like, I'm constantly trying to make my work more accessible. And I feel like so often what happens in the academy is taking a good, simple idea and making it as inaccessible as possible. So that might be one of the first things, is really thinking about how does anything we're doing in the classroom stay connected to and in right relationship to people who would never be in this classroom, who would never make it into the classroom, but whose lives are impacted by what we think and do and learn. I love what Michaela just said about the decentralization and sort of messing and playing with the power dynamics. And one of the first things I think is to name power dynamics in the space so that they can be shifted. And there's an exercise, I think it's an emergent strategy called a power circle. This power is basically the power walk, but it's a way of unveiling the privilege in a room and recentering around where should the attention in the room actually be moving to. I also think that using the classroom not just as a container dump, a place to move data or knowledge from one mind to many minds, but as a relational space where the relationships, like learning how to be in relationship, is one of the things you're learning alongside any other content. That especially in spaces that are, I think about this all the time, where I'm like, you can go to spaces that are multiracial, multicultural, multi-class, multi-thing, and then people get into them and still silo back into whatever feels comfortable, and you just parallel life your way through university instead of actually being forced into the uncomfortable but necessary confrontation of we are the next generation that will be running and leading everything. Do we know how to talk to each other? Right? Do we know how to be in good conflict in good ways? I think that's, if I was developing a university, almost all of it would be, how do we resolve conflict? How do we have difference? How do we be in our dignity while deeply disagreeing with each other? How do we make decisions where we have true multiple options, not just a binary of dissatisfying options. So, yeah. And teachers, stay curious.
Can we talk a little bit about there's some questions, maybe this ties into how do we change our language to be less academic and to reach more people. But there's some questions here about, sacrificing our pursuit of pleasure for the like climate change and the climate emergency. And there's also questions here about, does our actions for climate change also impact human rights? So maybe we can talk a little bit more about those sorts of intersections. Yeah.
I will say every single thing is connected to every single other thing. And one of the first ways that you can liberate yourself from trying to work on every single thing is to recognize that if you work deeply on the things that you are called to work on, it will impact every other thing. We live in an interconnected world. So the social dynamics, who has the money and doesn't have the money, it's all wildly connected. And what I think is very interesting is how do we combat the effort to compartmentalize and categorize and separate things out that are actually not separate. And Audre Lorde talked about this, that she doesn't try to organize people into siloed issues, but to think at community, to look at a community. A community has every issue. And I found that that's always liberated me, is I'm like, I've never been in a space where people are like, we are just only climate, I'm like, if you are, you're probably not seeing your whiteness. It's like, actually everybody is everything. We're all interconnected. And this is what it means to be human in this time, is actually, we have now an internet and a way of understanding just how interconnected we all are. And not just in a butterfly effect way, but in a very especially living in the belly of the beast, you pay taxes. Those taxes are what causes and funds and supports the warmongering that happens and the border wall that happens and the hysterectomies at that border. Like, you paid for it. And I tell people this all the time, like, we paid for it. We didn't have to pay for it. We could have opted out. We have not figured out how to collectively opt out of these things. And so we are complicit. We are deeply connected. Like, there's zero issues that I care about that I am not somehow complicit in supporting them happening. It breaks my heart, and it's why I work so hard to unveil these things and to be a counter force, right? But I'm constantly trying to figure out, I grew up as a military child. My father was in the Army. And so I'm like, my first thing was, I'm an anti-war activist and an anti-militarism activist. I was like, I'm against a person, my dad. And then I was like, oh, it's not against him. I start, when that, I think of it as the matrix thing, but when it's like the system, like, all clicks in, it's like, it's this massive interconnected system. You spend some years being overwhelmed by that, but then you find your place inside of it. Here's where I am. Here's what I can do. Here's the particular categorizations that have impacted me, and I will become so fluid they can't hold me. That's one of the things, that's why I'm committed to change so much, is I'm like, you think you pegged me as being this, now I'm that. You're not gonna catch me ever again. My ancestors finally got away from it, and I'm not going back. So even with philanthropy or anyone, I'm just like, why do you need to categorize us, right? Categorization implies control. It implies I'm still in charge, and I have decided what the subjects will even be, and you will fit into them. I'm so interested, again, if I was starting a university, I'm so interested, what it would look like to have an emergent university where the subjects emerged from what the students' interests were, and the teachers were wide-ranging enough to respond to that, right? There's just, there's just other ways of learning and other ways of being and other ways of playing with these intersections, because I don't want to be post-racial. I don't want to disappear all the cultural richness that my people have gathered from the harms that have been done to them and the things that predate that. I want all that. I want all of it, but I want it to be in an honored and dignified and curious interplay. And I think that's what we're constantly trying to figure out is if we don't know how to be with difference in a nonviolent way, in a pro-life way, like pro-life in the real sense of it, like I'm for what lives and what can live, right? If we don't know how to do that, I think we stay stuck. The categorizations keep us feeling somewhat safe, but never free and never growing, never evolving.
On that note, as we think about wrapping up our conversation, I want to just offer, I know, I want to just offer one more question that I wonder if each of you will ask. It's a portion of a question that's been asked in the Q&A. But before I ask it, I just want to thank you all so much, all those who attended, our panelists, Adrienne, for your time. Being in your presence makes me miss home. I'm from the Metro Detroit area, so just inspires me to continue to do this work at this college and beyond. So the question here is, what does the future look like to you? And I think it would be great in thinking about envisioning just worlds, if each of you would tackle this question before we sign off.
I'm gonna go last.
Personally, I wanted to ask Adrienne what she's reading, watching, and listening to, and like those types of questions. I feel like it's a lot of pressure to like envision a just world, but I don't know if other people are feeling like that. Also, someone asked like, how do you feel about Lovecraft Country? And I feel like that's really relevant. And I don't know if this is a better way or what people want to do, but I don't know. I personally don't know about envisioning just worlds.
I have a thought. I personally have realized more and more that I have no faith in a state that will actually protect us. So I call for the abolishment of the state, which comes with everything with it in my just world. But I don't know any of the details. But I know for sure there's no government. Or as we can think of government right now, there's none of that.
I feel similarly to Gold. I feel like that's a tough question to answer on the spot. I feel like Michaela's always really good at like articulating a long-term vision in a way that maybe I'm not. But I would also love to know what you're reading and watching, etc.
Isaiah, I know you have something.
One of the things that I've been sitting with a lot lately is my religion, my religiosity, and I think that what I'm really moved by is the way that in Adrienne's work and just in your activism, you have just been thinking about the parts of our religiosity, our faith, quote unquote, we sort of bring into, like we make this binary, what is sinful and what is good, right? And we actually do it in our activism too. And I think that I really do pray that, and I say this on purpose, I pray that people sort of hear in our activism that we're not interested or that I'm divesting from sin. I'm uninvested in people telling me that I'm not doing something properly, right? Even if it's for the end of the greater good. Like, I need you to sort of say this in this way for Black Lives Mattering, and I'm like, I don't like saying that anymore. So suck my dick, right? Like it's like you know, and then if that's unsinful to you, then deal with me later, and we could fight about it. You feel me? I'm from Brooklyn, like, and I really bring that with me, right? And say, what are you gonna do with it? Right? What are you gonna, and how are we gonna talk about it, and how are we gonna move on after that. That I'm really invested in that part. And so and also the other thing is that asking people, especially visionary people, like people who are invested in like science fiction in the future, how they see the future, I think it's disrespectful. I think it is a strange way of like asking a person, like a person who can divine, right, to like do their work for free at the end of a session. And I think they've asked Octavia Butler that shit all the time. And I wish I watched interviews of Octavia Butler like, rolling her eyes at the, so how do you see the future? And she's like, read a book, right? Like, just like, that's another one of those. I'm just like, come on, bro, right? Like, we can see the future. Pay me for it, right? Like I can see the future. I'm not telling you. I want you to learn how to do it.
Yeah, I agree with what Isaiah is saying. And also, I think a good place to start is divesting from the police and divesting eventually, hopefully, from the military at some point, because they have billions of dollars. They lose trillions of dollars somehow in accounting. And it's like a lot of our problems could be solved just by getting some of the money from the military. And so that's kind of like, some people say that's very extreme, but I think that's a good start. Yeah, like war is very expensive, very unnecessary, and very painful.
Anyone else? NICU, Lauren, Tali, Rachel, you just went. Yeah.
I'm just thinking about the election cycle that we are in and how it feels like we're just in this circle and it just keeps repeating itself. And so I don't really know what the future looks like if we are continued in this cycle and this just the two-party system that we have and everything that comes with it and all the sacrifices that we have to make because of that. So I'm not as hopeful right now. Maybe in the future I will be more hopeful, but just kind of feel like a hamster.
Something from emergent strategy that I think about a lot is just like prioritizing and uplifting the voices of those most impacted by whatever you're trying to organize against. So I think when I envision a just future, it is centered around like the voices of those most marginalized and what, you know, these groups want to call to action and putting them in positions of power.
Yeah, I was thinking a bit about a future that we all have a say in and that we have a power in. And so that exists in so many different ways, but that might feel different than a future that someone else is imagining. And so how do we imagine and work towards the one that we have power in?
Lauren, did you want to add anything?
Sure. I've been thinking a little as you all were talking, so maybe I've come up with something more coherent. I have been working a lot in the Young Democratic Socialists of America organization at Williams that just started. And that has prompted me to think a lot about like socialism, the socialist project as a potential version for our most just future, and how we separate the version of socialism that I and I think other people want to create from what socialism has looked like in previous iterations. Mm-hmm. That's something I've been thinking a lot about recently.
That's great. I love it. I feel like so many people, when I actually ask them, like, what is the future you entail? What they say is a socialist abolitionist future, but then they're scared to take on that language. So I'm like, yeah, you know, that's fun. That's great. I will say briefly, the future that I see is smaller, in every way smaller. It's not this big nation. It's not trying to take on all global concerns. It's really bringing the attention inward and getting very deeply passionate and deeply attentive to place and relationship. It's borderless. borderless both in where we are, like post-nationalist, but also how we are. That you're not rushing towards a category, rushing towards an identity, rushing towards a, you know, what can you say in an intro reel? And spiritual life is at the front, whatever that means for people. There's a way that the material is attended to so that we can really explore like the spiritual question of what are we doing here? And what am I watching and reading? I just finished the Lovecraft Country finale and did this like virtual reality event for it. And I felt very satisfied by it. I know there's critiques afoot and I also enjoy critiques. So I'm always like, if there's critiques, but everyone's still watching, then there's something good. There's something going on there. Like, I'm like, oh, you've created something really compelling. Like I always say this with Beyonce, where I'm like, oh, so there's a whole industry of people that are just like, I'm just watching this to hate you. But I'm like, but you're still watching it. So I really love art that creates its own universe of dialogue. I've been watching Schitt's Creek. I got curious about it after it won like every daytime Emmy, whatever. And I was just like, what is going on here? And so I started watching. I was like, oh, I don't think this is for me. And it's deeply for me. And I'm just sitting there crying and just like, I love this little family. So highly recommend Schitt's Creek. It's just really well written and really about the odd people and being a weirdo. I have been listening to a lot of Tank and the Bangers. The particular song Colors Change just like does rearranging things for me that feel very important. And Esperanza Spalding has been, yeah, we're in a little bit of exchange where she's like sending me little things to listen to, and I'm like enjoying that. And what else? I'm rewatching Sense8, which if you never saw it, Sense8 is just a beautiful emergent strategy extravaganza of a show. And I love it. And then podcasts, I think I mentioned the Finding Our Way podcast. I'm like super geeked about it. And like every time an episode drops, I'm like, forget what I was doing, squirrel. So I just run over. And I'm listening to Mariah Carey's audiobook. She just came out with a book. And as, like I'm a mixed race kid. So like when I was 13 or whatever, I can't remember exactly. I think I was like 12 or 13 when she came out. But I was like Mariah Carey is like, oh, I sing and I'm mixed, and like it was just a very important thing to have at that age. And so, she's gone in her way, many paths, and kind of stuck in a genre, but I'm really curious to see how she thinks about her life and talks about it. So I love when there's space where Black women get to tell their own story while they're still alive. And so anytime that happens, I run towards it and I inhale. So, all right. Thank y'all so much for having me, Williams College. It was great being in conversation with the 7 of you and then the expanded body. I really appreciate y'all.
I wish we could go have dinner. Usually it's like a practice that Williams has where we'll go on Spring Street and like have a meal together. But I guess we're not going to be able to do that. So like maybe we should all like email you and like we can all plan specific Zoom calls. I'm just putting that into the atmosphere. And
right. Yeah, you think my life is made of a different kind of time, huh?
Right.
Well, I will say this, a different thing we could do is I'm about to make khichdi, which has been my like favorite dish of this period of time. And I highly recommend you all like find a recipe and make it for yourself. It's like anti-inflammatory and good for every part of you and tastes delicious and is a joy to make and doesn't take that long. So cook for yourselves. All right.
So much. We loved spending time with you today. And thanks y'all for coming.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.